the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. My name is Brian Wallace, and I am the MS Michigan Man 64. The MS Michigan Man 64 podcast is about chronic disease awareness. I have had multiple sclerosis for the last 27 years. It's an invisible chronic disease that I've been battling for half of my life. I want to share with you what it is like living with the chronic disease from my experiences and the experiences of other chronic disease warriors. We can fight to have a voice to those that want to listen. Together, we can motivate and educate. Hi, welcome to the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. So to continue with my part two of my story, my post-diagnosis, we're talking 1997. I had just gotten married. I had just finished 2 years working for the state of Ohio, and I still was dealing with like drop foot, my left foot. My eyes were my biggest problem early. And I had a couple episodes in that time period, and I would go get the Solumedrol, and I just kept on going, and I would always bounce back to pretty close to my baseline, although I never got back to where I was before the episode, 100%. So that was like the beginning of the digress of my eyes. When I first got diagnosed with this multiple sclerosis and I went to my eye doctor, he said I had optic neuritis. I wore contacts at that time, and, I had to go to glasses because they had to start putting prism in. And then every year after, I would have an episode, and it had to do with my eyes. My eyes would never come back to where they were, and the prism always had to get increased. Every time I would get a new script. And that made my eyes, the glasses on my eyes get thicker and thicker and thicker. I kind of look like I got pop bottle glasses, and but that's all the optic neuritis in my eyes. But my eye doctor did a phenomenal job. He always had me seeing again. I can't give him enough props for what the care that he gave me with my eyes. And then after I got married, my wife at the time and I were discussing having a family, and I went back and forth in my head. Okay, I got MS. Do I want my kids to have MS? There was a lot of things that I was thinking about, and my wife at the time and I had a talk with my neurologist, and I asked him, what his thoughts were on the hereditary part of this disease. And he basically told me that there was really no scientific evidence that it was hereditary. There's a bunch of studies being done on it, but he just, he said that's a personal choice that you have to make with you and your spouse. And I'm like, all right, I get it. So, my wife and I went back and we talked, and we both decided, hey, let's give this a try. I'm doing okay. Let's give this a try. And, 1999, my son is born. I'm still working, and, I'm still having an episode every now and then, and I'd go get my Solumedrol, and I didn't even miss work. I'd have it scheduled first thing in the morning, and I'd be at work by 10 o'clock, and, my life just kept on going on. And then in 2001, I get the news that my mom is diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, I had already lost my dad to cancer when I was 15, and now I find out my mom has breast cancer, and that pretty much put a slam dunk on me not moving very far from her, and kind of sealed the deal that I'd be around her just in case she needed me to help her out. And my brother was in the area too, but he's only one person, and he had a family going on. So that was just a decision that I made, that I was going to stick by my mom. Like I had told her when I left to go to Michigan, that, if everything worked out good, I'd take care of her. And I decided that I was still going to help take care of her. So I was good with that, though. My wife had her family nearby, and that would keep me close to my mom. So, Everything was good to go. Um, and then in 2002, I had my daughter. I'm still having an episode, maybe every 12, 18 months. And I'm starting to figure out that stress is my biggest enemy. Um, every time I would have, like, the holiday season would come around and I would stress about it, going and visiting everybody, doing this, doing that. And I would end up having an episode. And I'm starting to finally figure this out. Like, okay, you got to really start to avoid this stress thing. And that's kind of way I've lived my whole life trying to avoid that. 2005 and 2010 to 2010 were relatively uneventful as far as my MS went. I still had an episode. I'd bounce back, but never bounce back right to where I needed to be. And then in 2000, like I don't know what year that was, like 2009 ish, 2008. That's when social media started really popping up and people were getting into Facebook and all that. And I tried that and I found it to be way too stressful. I don't know, for whatever reason. Me personally, it was a stress. And I think a lot of it had to do with because I grew up and, computers weren't really big. I typed my last paper at the University of Michigan on a typewriter because computers weren't on campus yet, really. They had just starting to pop up my senior year. So I'm not very techy, and Facebook comes out, and I just avoided it like the plague because I just found social media to be a stressor. And I pretty much stuck to that all the way up until about 9 months ago was the first time that I actually started getting a social media account. Um, and that's because I just wanted to avoid that stress. But I'm to the point in my life where and that doesn't even bother me anymore. That's why I changed the way I thought. And we'll talk more about that. But yeah, when Facebook came out, that just really, I didn't want any part of it. So I totally shut that part of the world out as far as social media went. And 2011, 2012 is when I went through a divorce, or the beginning of the divorce, end of the divorce. And that I knew was going to be a big problem as far as me and my MS. I had even told my ex wife at the time um, that that was a death sentence that we're getting divorced. And, I don't think she really understood what I was talking about. I wasn't talking about the sense that I was going to die, but that was going to kill my body as far as the MS went. Just because of the stress that was involved in all of that. And, I mean, I made it another 4 or 5 years, but I think a lot of that going through the divorce and all that had a lot to do with my downfall in 2015. But I mean, it's part of life, and that's just part of life that you have to handle with a chronic disease. And I just didn't handle it really, really well. Um, and we'll talk more about that too. So in 2014, I am offered a position on my alma mater's Padua Franciscan High School's football program as an offensive line coach. And that was like a dream thing for me. I love coaching. I coached my son growing up playing football. It was just a passion that I had for teaching kids. And I really enjoyed that. And my son was a freshman at the high school. So it was like, oh my God, I'm going to be able to coach my son up. And it was great. I mean, I thought that, the divorce was behind me and all that. And, life was going good. But, I never handled any of my depression and I never addressed it back from when I was 15 years old. And I pretty much ignored that. And, I didn't deal with the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis when I was 20, 27 years old. I didn't want help. I was too strong, right? I'm a former football player, University of Michigan. I'm a big, strong guy, and I didn't want to admit to anybody that I needed help. Big mistake on my part, but you can't change mistakes. You can only hope to educate people that they don't make the same mistakes that you did, which is what I am trying to do. So I'm going through the in 2015, I'm going through a really bad episode and I'm still working for the state, but I'm really struggling. And now my thought process has to kind of change again. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, you're working inside of a prison. There's a lot of dangerous people in here, and you're not really in the best of shape now to protect yourself. So I had to think long and hard about this decision, but I decided that what was in my best interest was for me to go out on a disability retirement from the state of Ohio with 20 years of service. That really compounded to my mental health, depression, and I did not handle that well. I just threw away a 20-year career working for the state of Ohio. What am I going to do now? I just lost my income. That wasn't a choice that I wanted to make, but I physically could not do that job. And that was not handled real well by me and my mental health. And it spiraled. I went into a very, very deep depression. And I had met my wife at the time in 2012, and we're going through, ups and downs. And a lot of it had to do with me and my depression, and I didn't want to accept things. And she kind of knew that, and she kept on telling me that, and I kept on telling her, "Nah, you're crazy. It's not. It's just the MS." And I made up every excuse I could think of to avoid the mental health part. Um, and then she finally woke me up, and I made a phone call to my neurologist. And, I told him, I had to go out and well, he did the paperwork for me for my disability. So he already knew the situation I was in. And, I told him that I just don't even really feel like living anymore. What's the point? And he immediately called me into his office the very next day, and talked to me. And he said that, we got to get you on a antidepressant like right now. And I want you to talk to a psychologist. And he ran through the whole thing. So he put me on a Fexer, and about 30 days later, I actually did start feeling a relief from the anxiety part of it. And I went to see a psychologist, and of course, he diagnosed me severely depressed, which is a very common diagnosis with any chronic disease. I mean, you get told any point in time in your life that you have something that it will never go away. The way that you feel right now is the way that you're going to feel probably for the rest of your life. That really messes with your head. And so it's not uncommon. And I wish I wasn't afraid back when I was 27 to admit that, and I would have gotten help a lot sooner. That's a huge mistake that I made that I would not suggest to anybody. Once you get diagnosed with a chronic disease, especially like multiple sclerosis, you might not think you're depressed, because I always said that to myself. Oh, no, you're not depressed. You're good. I mean, everything's good. You're married. You got kids. Everything's going good. But I was, looking back at a lot of the things that I did back then, I was very depressed, but did not want to admit that. So in 2017, I started to get a lot better as far as my mental part of it. And that's when my wife at the time, or my new wife, uh, she said to me, you need to go out and find something to occupy your time. Even though you can't do what you used to do, you can still be productive in society. You got to find something, or you're just gonna plummet. And I agreed with her, so I started putting my resume on Indeed. I'm thinking to myself, who's going to hire me? I'm, mid 40s, and I am disabled. But I put my resume out. I couldn't make over a certain dollar amount, because the way that the state of Ohio was set up is that you get your disability pension based on years of service. So it's all calculated. And so I got my percentage, and I can only make up to a certain percentage a year with getting my disability. If I go over that dollar amount, I would have lost my disability. So I was kind of handcuffed into what I could do and how much I could make. But I did. I went out. I found like a basic entry level job, making a little bit of money, just to add to the income with for me and my wife. And I found a job with a company. I'm not allowed to talk about the company, so I won't. But I got a job with the company, and I was doing something that I was really along the lines of where I came from inside the prison, and I enjoyed it. And I was there a year, and then I got switched over to a different department, different supervisor, and I was doing something completely different. And this was all computer work. So I've already said that my eyes were my biggest enemy. Um, and I was having an issue when I got transferred with the website that I had to use. The colors on it just didn't really. I couldn't see them very well, and I started to make mistakes. And I started, I got disciplined for them, and I'm like, I don't even know how I made that mistake because that's stupid. But I thought I was doing the right thing, but it was my eyes that, and I never even put two and two together. um, but once I finally did, I went to my supervisor and, I put in for a reasonable accommodation and all that. And bottom line is that eventually they ended up terminating me because of mistakes that I made because of my MS. Um, I didn't really think that that was very fair. Being somebody with a chronic disease, all I wanted to do was work. I was doing the best I could. But I understand the company's point too. I mean, if I'm not making them money, then they're gonna get rid of their dead weight. And if I'm dead weight, then they're gonna get rid of me. I still didn't think it was very fair. I talked to an attorney. I told him the story. He said, "Absolutely, Brian." He goes, "They didn't handle that right." I'm learning because I never been through this before. So he filed lawsuit, and they ended up settling with me, and they made me sign a paper saying that I would never mention their name. Um, and they basically just paid me off just to shut me up. And I learned that. I learned that by going through that process, and I put it into my memory bank to remember if I ever needed it again. Because I, you learn by experience, and I went through that experience, and it was very eye opening to how the criminal just or how the criminal system works as far as that side of it. I mean, everything that I've always handled was inside of a prison. It was all felony stuff. This was something completely different to me. And it was a learning experience, but I went through that, and they settled with me, and I put out resumes, and I got hired by another organization. And it was again along the same lines of what I was doing inside the prison. And I loved it. And I did that for 4 years. Um, I got my reviews every year were above, above, above. It was based on a 5 point scale. I was always like right around a 4.8. They loved me. And I thought, okay, I got it made. I got a job that was inside my threshold for money. And it helped me and my wife. We lived, not a comfortable life, but we made it, and everything was good. So the building that I worked at, for this organization, they had an elevator that's where I parked. That was where the handicap parking was. It was on the second floor or third floor. And, I'd get out, park in the handicap, go to the elevator. It was the closest, most direct way to my office, shortest walk. And I did that for 4 years. So this elevator always had problems since day one that I started. It would go out. I would have to take steps to get down to the bottom floor to get to my car. 3 flights of steps. I'd go up and down, every now and then. It would happen every 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I just dealt with it because when you got a chronic disease, you don't want to piss anybody off, right? That's the way you think. So that was my thought process. And I'm like, I'm just not going to say anything. I'll struggle. It doesn't happen that often. And I just dealt with it for 4 years. So last year, I had a really bad episode that, I mean, this was one of those ones where I thought that, okay, this is it. I'm going to be in a wheelchair type episodes. And or when COVID hit, this organization, like everybody else, everybody went work from home. And I always chose to go into the office because we had to have one person on site from each department. And I always said, hey, I'll go in because I don't want to sit at home. I don't want to work from home. I don't want to, that's not me. I like being out with people. So I worked all through COVID, going into the office. And then all of a sudden, fast forward to last year, I got hit with that really bad episode, and I am recuperating at home. I'm working from home actually because, COVID brought a lot of new options for employers. So I'm working from home, recovering, and I tell the supervisors, my supervisor, anybody that'll listen to me, I am not going to be able to come back into the office until that elevator gets fixed. My MS is just too bad right now. I'm not walking that well. I can't do those steps. Make a long story short, we went back and forth for like 11 months, 12 months. And this organization ended up terminating me because they said that I refused to come back into the office. Um, and I didn't think that that was right because the reason why I wasn't coming into the office was because of their elevator. So I have litigation with that one going on now. So I'm not going to discuss that one a whole lot. But, this is the shit that we go through having a chronic disease that nobody hears about or understands unless you actually have it or you live with somebody that has it. This is a constant battle that we, as chronic disease warriors, have to fight every day. We not only have to fight the disease that we got, but we have to fight with society just to be a part of that. It's like we're treated like a third class type of citizens. And it makes me angry. It makes me frustrated. And that is the whole reason why I started doing this podcast, was to just bring awareness that this stuff happens. It happens a lot, and it's just not right. So when they ended up terminating me, that was when I really thought my life was done. And I always had in the back of my playbook to go back to the University of Michigan to ask for help. And what I mean by that is back when I played for Bo Schembechler, he told us as a team that, you graduate here a Michigan man and you will always be a Michigan man. And he told us that if you ever need anything from Michigan, you can always come to the football program and ask for help. So what I ended up doing was, let me go before that. So I used to go to Michigan football games every year. My ex-wife and I would go up and we would go and see either the Michigan game, a Michigan Ohio State game, or we would go see the Michigan State game. Every year, whichever one was in Ann Arbor, we would go up and watch the game. And it was real fun. I was able to do this with my mobility. I was still able to do it. And, we would hang out with a lot of the former players. Well, the one year that I went up, I ran into Bo, and Bo asked me how I was doing, and we were just talking. And he said, "Hey, I heard you got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis." I said, "Yeah, that's right, coach. I did." And he said, "Well, you need anything with that? You need any help?" And I said, "No." I go, "I got it." I go, "I'm a Michigan man. I can handle this." And he said, "Okay." He said, "But you remember that if you ever need help, don't hesitate to reach out to the program." And I remembered him telling me that. So what I did earlier this year is I reached out to the Michigan football program. Great guy, Andy Borowski, former player. He played a few years before me, but I got a hold of him and I told him my story. And without hesitation, the Michigan football alumni, and they go by FAM. You can look them up. It's .org organization, but this organization, it's all football alumni that belong to FAM, like myself and anybody else that played for them. But they take members of anybody that wants to be a member of the organization. So him and the FAM organization, um, they organized a GoFundMe on my behalf, and my wife and I were so blown away. It was just, it's undescribable as to the gratitude that we felt from the Michigan football community. And that is what I was a part of. And I totally like got a chance to experience that. And then as a former player, I got to go back to Michigan and ask them for help. And they just delivered unbelievable. I have nothing but great things to say about FAM, and like I said, look at the organization up. I will put it in my link. It's great organization, and go blue and hail to the victors. I love the University of Michigan. I would die for them. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them. Just in what I've done with fighting this disease and what they've done for me. And it's just the best university in the country. I can't say more good things about them. So that is pretty much my life as far as pre and post diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And I just want you to know that, this is a tough disease, but it is not impossible to live with. You're going to run into roadblocks, and you just got to figure out a way to get around that roadblock and keep on going and surround yourself with good people that support you and understand. That is a huge key with this disease or any chronic disease. All right, MS Michigan Man, I am out until the next episode. You all have a great day.